The Source engine has gone through many changes throughout the years, being introduced in 2004 from Half-Life 2. My goal here today is to document the changes between all of them. If you'd like to skip to a specific game, go to the timestamp linked in the description below. Counter-Strike Source. The Source engine in this game was introduced way back in 2004, and because of it being the first game, the engine itself in-game has changed a ton. And I don't want to go out of my way to get a sketchy build from 2004, I will only be comparing what the game is like since its last engine update, which is around 2011. Movement. The movement in Counter-Strike Source was balanced around the Counter-Strike game formula. Being a bit slower than other games such as Half-Life, there is a noticeable momentum to the characters, ergo it takes a bit to speed up, slow down, and etc. One way to get around this, however, is by jumping. Jumping and landing, however, slows all momentum down. However, there is a bug in the game that Valve has tried to patch, and actually succeeded, named bunny hopping. Bunny hopping occurs when you jump at the frame you hit the ground. Jumping as soon as you land allows you to build up speed up to some crazy speeds. This was patched mostly in future updates, however, and is now capped to a certain degree in all future games. All Counter-Strike games change their speed depending on what weapon you're using. For instance, you'll run slower with the M4 route when compared to a knife. In Counter-Strike Source, all pistols move you at the same speed. Ragdolls in this game are much more realistic as the body has more weight. And when you move the camera around, the weapon moves with it. Frame rate. The frame rate in Counter-Strike Source is fantastic. Keep in mind this will vary in all machines, but almost anything can run this game, averaging about 300 FPS at all times, even in battles. The settings in Counter-Strike Source are fairly similar to what is in most Source games today, except for Counter-Strike Global Offensive, whereas you have the basic texture, model, and the like, but you also have the multiplayer tab, which allows you to customize your crosshair, spray, and more things hidden away in the advanced tabs. There is a strange option to choose your DX level in the video settings, however, but this only brings up DX level 9. Graphics. The graphics in Counter-Strike Source are very 2004-like, with grimy textures and all that, but as the game got updates, new graphical features were updated, such as HDR. Despite this, in my honest opinion, HDR does not look that great with a lot of Counter-Strike Source's textures, as many complaints exist of it being way too bright, and I can agree with that. The following footage you are seeing right now is taken with all the settings at max, except for motion blur. Model-wise, they don't look half bad, they hold up quite decently enough. However, the general low quality of them has become more apparent in the faces and textures and some on the camo pants. Texture-wise, as stated before, the game looks meh. Even on very high settings, the textures do not look nice when viewed at a close angle. Effects in the game are rarely seen, except for when the bomb explodes, and even then, it's not that important and is thus negligible at best. For what it is, the game looks decent for being near 14 years old. Half-Life Source. Half-Life Source is a remake to the Source engine from the original Half-Life, released in 1999. As such, it's a lot different to most of the games on this video. Note, this applies to all the remakes such as Day of Defeat and Half-Life Deathmatch. Movement. The movement in Half-Life Source, and thus all of the other games, is one of the fastest in the series. Bunny hopping in this game is quite weird. It doesn't seem to be a cap, but you can still go incredibly fast. There are things you could do to uncap the speed with injecting the game and all that fast, but I again refuse to do it. Settings. Exactly the same as Half-Life 2. Not much to say. Graphics. The game only got a Source makeover, not model updates, so the original models are still there in their 1999 glory. So, no. The graphics do not look good for today's standards. I mean, look at the faces. Half-Life 2. Half-Life 2 was the first game that introduced the Source engine. Being ordered to the Counter-Strike Source, I showed that one first because of a big update that hit the game in 2007, the Orange Box update, which was basically Source 2 before Source 2 was even a thing. This had multiple changes to the engine, most of which are covered in this image from sourceruns.org. As I do not have access to the old engine, I will be comparing the new engine in this video. Movement. The movement in Half-Life 2 is extremely faster than in Counter-Strike Source. Being able to sprint is only icing on the cake. Landing after jumping will no longer slow you down as it did in CSS. And the biggest thing, bunny hopping, or accelerated back hopping. This occurs when you sprint, jump, turn around, and bunny hop backwards while crouching. This occurs because Valve tried to cap your speed while moving forward. However, since you're moving backwards, it keeps on adding speed to you, up to as fast as you can go without smacking into a wall. Settings. The settings in Half-Life 2 are extremely similar to the ones in Counter-Strike Source, so this part won't be long. Apart from there being no multiplayer option, as Half-Life 2 itself does not contain any multiplayer of the sort, so having it would be unneeded. Graphics. The graphics in Half-Life 2 are better than the ones in Counter-Strike Source, however the textures are mostly still the same, except for the floors, because they have a very nice reflective properties to them. So that's a plus, I guess. Models in the game look extremely dated, even more so than in CSS, as most of the time armor covers up the faces in that game. Here, you can see all the faces in their 2004 or 7 detail. The explosions as such in the game look basically the same in Counter-Strike Source, so just take what I said from that and apply it here. They look nice. The HDR in this game is much better, as there aren't many bright textures in the game, so it doesn't scream at your eyeballs whenever you look at something that's brighter than a light bulb. Overall, the graphics in this game hold up very well. Quite well, considering its 2007 makeover of sorts. Half-Life 2 Episode 1 was released in 2006, 2 years after the original release of Half-Life 2. The game is mostly a story continuation, so not as much has changed in the engine. So, as such, this part will be in brief. The movement and settings are exactly the same in HL2, so it's not even worth covering here. Graphics. The graphics did get a bit of a touch-up. Models look better and the textures also got an update, for the most part. Trash, of course, looks like trash. Other than that, however, it's mostly just the same thing. Episode 2 is really only graphics. Really. So I'm gonna read what I have in my script here pretty quickly. So here it goes. The second episode only changes graphical. HDR looks better, that's about it. Got it? Let's move on. Along with Team Fortress 2, it's, well, how to say much different than other games with the Source engine. As there are multiple classes to choose from, you can't keep the speed and such the exact same from all the others. TF2 has had many updates to just change the engine. Luckily, I have an original build of the game from Source Filmmaker, so comparisons will be made using the SFM beta build of TF2. Movement. TF2's movement varies across classes, and as most of you are coming from a TF2 based channel, I hope most of you knows how each class moves. And if you don't, just look it up on the wiki or something. I'm not gonna sit here for 20 minutes explaining what each class moves. I got things to do, you know? When it comes to the build I have, one thing I have noticed, apart from the blank textures, is that the classes, for the most part, control and go at the speeds you would expect. Except for Spy, who moves at a normal 100%, as that was not changed until you meet your match. However, one thing I did notice is that ragdolls are much different, at least when it comes to suicide. In the current game, when you end your life, your body stops dead in its tracks, flopping to the ground and obeying no laws of bones or anything. However, in the early build here, your body preserves the momentum you had before you died, and the ragdolls seem to be more structured, I guess the word would be. They bounce and float a bit more as well. Here's a side-by-side comparison. Pretty odd. Apart from that, nothing much has made too much of a drastic note. Settings. The same as current, just less defined as Team Fortress-y, and for some reason the text wants to be gigantic, which I assume is just a problem with the build I am using. Graphics. A lot has changed here. A video was even made covering the changes from 2007, which I'll link below. Mainly, the gist of the video is that the graphics seem to have gotten less realistic, but that's an argument I won't get into. The undeniable fact is that something is different. Could it be that staring at rocks in the SFM build without blue mods still burns your retinas? Could be.
Highness, I'm sure it's not that noticeable.
In layman's terms, speedy thing goes in, speedy thing comes out.
Like another game using the Source engine, the Stanley Parable, Portal started out as a game using a complete rip-off of the Half-Life 2 engine, just adding things on to suit the game's needs. In this early state, according to Valve News Network video on the topic, Tyler states,
"Early on, the puzzles that did exist were very basic in their appearance. Platforms consisted of large hammer blocks, and any puzzle elements such as buttons and cubes borrowed heavily from Half-Life 2's model set. For example, as you can see here, Chamber 13 took on a Half-Life 2 appearance, which would evolve greatly over time. Buttons were small red bumps, and cubes were taken directly from Half-Life 2. Portals at this time took the form of RT cameras, as seen in this screenshot, which is the earliest screenshot available of the relaxation."
Now, I could just use this video as a reference for the rest of the part of this video, which I probably will, but if you want to see this video in full, link is in the description. Finding an old copy of Portal is harder than you think it is. My usual method of getting this is to go into betas, but nope, so away we go. Movement. The movement in the build of Portal I have, and I consumed from Tywoods video, as he stated.
Development, one of the first things that were finished was the puzzles, and very early on, most, if not all of the chambers were completed. Most of the work that was done in the 2 years that Portal was developed went into refining the art style and gameplay to best benefit the player and convey what was needed to be done next.
Is the same as the retail. A couple things are different. In this game, you can still do accelerate backhopping, or ABH, as mentioned earlier. Bunny hopping forward seems a bit harder, but it's still kind of possible. Other than that, just take what I said about Half-Life 2's movement and apply it here. It's almost the exact same. Settings. I have come a long way to finally get to say this. The settings menu is different by like one menu. This being a Portal game, there is a Portal render depth option, which affects how many portals the game will render before stopping completely, or just doing some magic voodoo and some weird stuff I can't explain myself. Other than that, it's just the same. Graphics. Apart from the aforementioned Portal render depth, the game overall looks the same as the other Source games. One difference though, the game contains blood that looks fairly similar to a lot of other games in the Source engine, and it's different than most of the other games Source runs with blood in, except for say Garry's Mod and Half-Life 2 to an extent.
I don't want your damn lemons! What am I supposed to do with these?
Portal 2 was released in 2011, so as we move on to the 2010s of the games being covered, we also move on to the first, in this video, a games that actually use their own settings menu without using this drab thing. As for the history of Portal 2, the beta, from old shaky cam footage from 2010, taken at an IGN panel, we can definitely hear a difference in Wheatley's voice. That was a change, just listen to it here.
Perfect. Now they told me I'm never, ever to disengage myself from this rail, or I will die.
Thank God for said change, or I don't think Wheatley would have won multiple awards. If you want to delve further back into the Portal 2's history, you can find some interesting stuff if you dig far enough. Movement. The movement in Portal 2 is actually quite different from Portal 1. In Portal 1, ABH is still the main method of transportation. However, in Portal 2, ABH is almost impossible, but normal bunny hopping still seems to remain. You can no longer gain as much horizontal movement as you did in Portal 1, but instead some of that has transferred over to a vertical leap. So as you can imagine, this does a lot of things, just generally. For instance, the entire change of speedruns. I mean, look at this.
I know things look bleak, but that crazy man down there was right. And he'll probably kill us because he's incredibly powerful and I have no plan.
I don't know what's going on either. Again, that seems to be it. The bunny hopping mechanic was nerfed, massively. Graphics. Portal 2 doesn't look bad at all. As there are no humans in the games, besides Chell as the physical model, the critique of the human face is almost never here, until you look at Chell up close in a portal, and this happens. I'm thankful for the lack of humans now. Texture-wise, this game still looks decent, even more so in the early Decayed levels, and what player/entity models there are still look fantastic after 7 or 8 years later. Settings. As I said before, Portal 2 is the first game in this video to have its own custom settings menu. So as such, we get what seems to be less options. You can no longer adjust the FOV in the games menu, unlike, again, games past. So you must enable the dev console and fiddle about with it there. Luckily, the game's auto set to 90 so as to not to make everyone throw up upon playing the game. Overall, Portal 2 is a good step in the gaming world from 2011.
Seals here. Grab and peel. Grab and peel. Seals here. Gotta grab everything I can.
The first Left 4 Dead game was released way back in 2008, and for it being released around that time, the cult that Valve made around the old options menu was finally broken, as this was the first game, to my knowledge, to use its own options menu, and honestly, being a bit better than Portal 2's, but I won't make a debate there. The history of Left 4 Dead is, again, an interesting one. I'll give a condensed version here, but you can read up about it in your own time. But being developed in 2005, being bought by Valve in 2007, only to be released later on the orange box as a teaser, because Valve sure loves doing that. Finally, being released in 2008, the game, of course, used the 2008 version of the Source Engine, which allowed multi-core rendering, as useless as it is in the Source Engine, but also allowing for hair and clothing to move realistically with movement, also to portray zombies being shoved in different locations allowing for different results. Animation-wise, besides the aforementioned, characters lean left, right, etc. when following a path, mostly noticeable on the DLC maps in the game, and the addition to multiple small effects, such as film grain and a vignette around the screen. Movement. Movement in the first Left 4 Dead game is quite slow, as you'd imagine from the zombie survival games, so things like bunny hopping is completely impossible, unless you're jumping down a cliff, and if that case, stop jumping, or you might end up splat dead on the ground. There's also a dedicated walk button on the shift key, which is ported over Counter-Strike and is for the most part useless in Left 4 Dead. Not much else to say about movement. Graphics. Graphics, besides looking muddy in some areas, looks decent, if you don't look too hard. However, I mentioned earlier that Source gave the game an update when it comes to rainy areas, which ages okay, I guess. In the first game, when it comes to blood and gore, or blood and minor gore, you can just shoot limbs off, which eventually did change in Left 4 Dead 2, which I'll get into soon. But other than slightly improved textures, and the earlier mentioned film grain and vignette, the game looks just about what you expect from 2008. Settings. The settings menu is unique, again, using a much more detailed way of showing options when compared to Portal 2, and giving you more to choose from, and if I were a critic of options menus, I'd give this one a good 7 out of 10. But I'm not, so I'll give it an 8 out of 10. Being released literally 1 year after the first game in 2009, and so for that short gap, there was not a lot of changes, engine-wise. What changes did occur are gameplay focused, story focused, etc., not engine focused. And because of all this part of the video will be extremely short. I'll just cover the history and development and a couple of small changes, and one large change when it comes to graphics. Movement is the exact same. Don't worry about that. Graphics. One major difference with graphics in this game is the blood and gore effects. There's an entire slideshow on it, which is a bit worrying, but looking through it, as I said before, they were massively overhauled. As with most of the links I have mentioned, there will be links in the description. As for the settings, Left 4 Dead 2 has a similar options menu than the one in Left 4 Dead 1, as I said before with a 1 year gap between games, with the only exception having it to be more responsive, so take that as you will. With the release of Counter-Strike Global Offensive in 2012, it also marks the last game being covered here, and again, luckily Steam provides an early build of the game. For anyone willing to install it, go here. According to the developer commentary website, they state that in this game, light mapped ambient occlusion, real-time outdoor shadow mapping, and normal maps upon the release of the game. Whether or not these are 100% used on the release date is up for debate. Anyway, onto the movement. In CSGO, bunny hopping has always been a debated topic, and I'll make my stance known on this one. It is impossible to consistently bunny hop in CSGO. Counter-Strike Global Offensive will mark your speed down at a certain point. This much is undebatable. However, it is still possible to bunny hop, so that is part of it. Again, since this is a Counter-Strike game, it's around the formula of said game, so normally your basic movement speed is much slower than other games in the Source engine. As for the early build, nothing much has changed, besides minor things like the weight of some weapons, i.e. how much they slow you down for. But that is more gameplay focused, so I won't cover it. Graphics. CSGO's old screenshots make the game look quite good, and when you first boot it up during Scaleform, your first impressions are not based around graphics, more around the ear-blasting sound, as CSGO loves to do. But anyway, on highest settings, CSGO does not look that bad, even in the early build. However, graphics did improve, as you'd hope. Settings. Oh boy, a lot has changed with the settings menu over the years. I'll be primarily going over the Source 2 version as implemented by Powerama, but if you want to have more in-depth look-see at all the versions, take a look at 3 Cooks Phillips' video on this. Very interesting stuff, link in the description. With Panorama, we finally get to the end, the top of the top, and we also find Valve's favorite effect, Gaussian blur, because Jesus Christ, look at the amount of it. Jokes aside, this is easily my favorite options/settings menu to date. Changing settings doesn't take 20 years to do either, which is always needed, since older games would sometimes alt-tab you out of the game for a couple seconds. Either way, I love this menu. Hidden deep within the Steam client, there's a Tools section. This is mainly used for the Hammer editor for a lot of people, but in this case, there are stress tests for the Source engine developers. I'm not one of them, but I'm a YouTuber making a video, so one for 2006, one for 2007, and one for 2013. I will be showing them in full, just sped up, and there are a couple minor differences between them. See if you can spot them.